All right, well, why don't we dig in? I know there are a handful of other people who had RSVP'd who I suspect will tune in the next few minutes, but to be respectful of everybody's time, let's dig in with this. I'm Scott Vogel. I'm a transportation planner with the Rockingham Planning Commission, and thank you all for tuning in tonight. I want to welcome you to this meeting of the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway Committee. And for those who haven't participated in one of these before, our New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway Committee, we're technically an advisory committee to the Rockingham Planning Commission. And this committee was originally established back in 2008 to provide guidance for the development of the conceptual design and implementation study for the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway, which will be New Hampshire's section of the East Coast Greenway. In the subsequent years, this group has met on and off really to further the efforts to get the Greenway built, raising community awareness of the trail project, building municipal support, encouraging the state to acquire the section of the Hampton branch rail corridor from Hampton to Portsmouth when that became available a number of years ago, working with the towns and DOT to negotiate the municipal management agreement for the trail once it's completed, working to secure funds for trail construction and trailhead facilities and other amenities, and then also serving as a forum for communication among the various corridor communities. So the central focus of our meeting tonight is going to be a presentation by Dr. Shannon Rogers from UNH Cooperative Extension. I actually tuned into a version of this presentation back in June that she did for University of Vermont's Cooperative Extension Service, and thought it seemed like really useful information for our corridor communities here along the Seacoast, with thoughts for things that we can be doing over the next couple of years to get ready for the completion of the first section of the Greenway from Hampton up to Portsmouth. Steps that let me admit a couple other people here. Steps that towns and businesses can be taking to be ready to really capitalize on having the trail to act as a catalyst for local economic development. So we've got a fairly big group, but since there are some unfamiliar faces, I'd like to just go around really briefly, have everybody just say your name and the town you're from or the agency you're with. As I said, I'm Scott Vogel with the Rockingham Planning Commission. Michael, could I ask you to go next? Michael Tully?
Mike Edgar from Hampton. I'm a state representative right now.
Great, thanks. Michael Tully?
Michael Tully, Town Administrator in Northampton.
Great. Andrew Janiak?
Andrew Janiak from Rye in Northampton, New Hampshire.
Okay. Mike Dugas?
Good evening, I'm Mike Dugas. I'm the project manager for the DOT.
Great. And I'm just going in the order you're appearing on my screen here. Danya?
Danya Sigley of Rye Beach.
And Mark? Mark Dubowski?
Yep, with Green Peterson, potential consultant for the DOT for the Seacoast Greenway.
Wonderful, thank you. Christine?
Christine Keeney from the East Coast Greenway Alliance.
Great. Nancy?
Nancy Stiles, Hampton.
Tony?
Tony Cholfi, Hampton, resident.
Larry?
Larry Smith.
Yeah, Larry Day, resident Greenland.
Wonderful. Libby?
Libby Bartolini, Hampton resident.
David Allen?
David Allen, Portsmouth resident and a member of SABRE.
Great. Catherine?
Hi, Catherine Howard. Yeah, I was involved many, many years ago. I'm from Hampton. I'm also running for a state rep.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
Jen Rowden.
Jen Rowden with Rockingham Planning Commission and the part-time planner in Northampton.
Jerry Klima. Let me unmute you, Jerry. Okay. Scott Baker.
Scott Baker from Northampton.
Okay. Seth.
Seth McNally, resident, New Hampshire, Seacoast Greenway.
Wonderful.
Jerry Klein, I just unmuted myself. I'm sorry. I'm from the Coastal Trails Coalition in Massachusetts, and we are now connected to New Hampshire. So please join us.
Fantastic. Thanks for tuning in. Larry Smith, our other Larry. Yes, congratulations.
Larry Smith, Hampton Falls. Don't know why my video is not working.
Wonder if I can do anything about that. Cindy.
Hi, Cindy Henry, Northampton resident.
Cindy Henry is your last name?
Yes, Cindy Henry.
Great. And I think we have one person on the phone, 767-3836.
That's Tom Argue, Northampton Rails to Trails. Until my laptop starts cooperating, I'll be on the phone.
Wonderful. Thanks. We've got a couple of other people that have just tuned in. We're just finishing a round of introductions. Welcome, Senator. Just introduce yourself.
Yeah, so Senator Tom Sherman from District 24, which is the Seacoast Greenway district, except for Portsmouth. That's 23. No, that's 21. And I do have to jump off at 8, so I'm sorry at 7, so I'm sorry to be late joining, but thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for joining. I think Bob Spiegelman is still connecting, and we have one other identified as owner here.
Me, that's Derek Griggs.
Hey, Derek. All right, so
Juliet Walker, I'm here too.
Oh, Juliet, sorry I missed you.
That's okay.
You shifted. You were at the bottom of my screen and then went to the top of my screen.
All right. Take care. Okay, bye.
Okay. Anyone else I missed? Okay. So let me just take a moment to introduce Shannon Rogers. Dr. Shannon Rogers, she serves as the state specialist for nature-based economic development on the Community and Economic Development Team for UNH Cooperative Extension. She works with local communities to sustainably leverage their natural assets for economic vibrancy. She's also an associate extension professor and teaches in the Environmental and Resource Economics program at UNH. She's a New Hampshire native, a Durham resident, and holds visiting faculty appointments at Plymouth State University and also at Dartmouth, which is her alma mater. So I'm pretty certain everybody spent a lot of time on Zoom in the last 6 months. Just a couple of notes. This tends to work best if everybody stays muted until you want to ask a question. For the most part, we'll try to hold questions until the end of Shannon's presentation. Certainly any questions that are in depth, if you just need a quick clarification of a point, I'll keep an eye out for raised hands, and we'll call on you and she can answer those questions as we go. Also just want to note that we're recording this and also streaming it live on YouTube. There seems to be about a 45-second delay on the YouTube feed. But with that, let me turn it over to Shannon Rogers, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Scott. Good evening, everyone.
And everyone, thank you to the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway Committee for the opportunity to chat with you about nature economy, which is something I'm very excited about. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides, like Scott said, but happy to take clarifying questions as I go along. And then hopefully we'll have time at the end. I've planned for that to have, more in-depth Q&A. And I'm just going to talk about some stories of where we're working in the state and some research that we've done on the aspects of your economy and your natural assets. All right, so one second here. Does everybody see the slides? All right, so I am lucky enough to be able to work on our community and economic development team at UNH Cooperative Extension. And this is a fairly new area our team has gotten into because work over the years by my colleagues, Charlie French and Molly Donovan and others, had seen that communities across the state were maybe having a struggling Main Street, struggling downtown, but they had these wonderful natural assets like trails, waterways, mountains, you name it, for recreation, quality of life. And so really, they were looking for someone to work on putting those pieces together. And that's what I get to work on, luckily, at UNH. And so we're seeing this across the country. Communities are leveraging their natural capital. You know, in Economics 101, you learn about your financial capital and your human capital, maybe. But natural capital is another aspect of communities that really does benefit their economy. And let's just advance. Recreation, outdoor recreation, has become a really large part of the US economy. It's almost $1 trillion industry and has been growing at a faster rate than other parts of the economy, adding jobs, contributing to tax revenue, supporting expenditures, particularly in the recreation, trip, and travel area, and also contributing to lots of aspects of quality of life. So specifically with trails, I think we probably all know these, but we can see benefits for that quality of life. There are also business impacts that we can look at and measure, property value implications of being near a trail, public health benefits, as well as accessibility and connectivity. That is really important as well. I just like to point out this resource in case folks haven't heard of it. Headwaters Economics has a trail benefits library that has a great number of studies on all of those different topic areas that looks at the value of trails, particularly in monetizing those in some cases, or talking about how they were measured in others. So a really neat resource that we often use. But I'm going to tell you about some research we started to do a couple of years ago when we were looking at that connection between trails and towns. And we started, seeing what other states were doing and if we could bring something similar to New Hampshire. And two programs came to the top of our research. This was supported by a grant from the Northeast Center for Rural Development, with colleagues at UVM and at Yukon Extension, as well as Kentucky and Washington State. So we looked at two programs, the Kentucky Trail Town program and then the Trail Town program in Pennsylvania. And these are economic development programs. It's interesting when we first start talking about trails to communities, they'll often be like, oh, okay, so you're going to help us build a trail. We don't build trails and we're not very good at that. There's plenty of people that have those skills, but really what we help folks do is think about what aspects need to be in place to benefit from having a trail in your community. So we researched these programs and kind of came up, with this matrix about elements of success that needed to be in place. Obviously, the natural, you needed to have a trail in order to be a trail town, but really having more than one natural feature, a trail and a river, or even in Kentucky, rivers were trails. They had blue trails, but also having, a park or a mountain or something else that would keep people in your region a little bit longer. Then having the built environment, having an actual town for people to visit, that is recognizable, accessible, in some cases walkable, doesn't always have to be walkable, and I'll share some examples about that. But having parking, bike racks, sidewalks, signage is huge. We'll talk a lot about that in a minute. But then also having these economic pieces. Do you have businesses that trail users would stop and spend money in? So we spent a lot of time thinking about and researching what those businesses were. And then finally, with all of the economic and community development work we do, having that social or leadership component is the most key. We have seen that time and time again, that there needs to be a leader, or in most cases, a really diverse stakeholder committee has been the most successful for kind of keeping the process going, because it is a long process, or can be, and you definitely need a variety of skill sets and interests that can help with promotion and marketing. So, like I said, we spent a lot of time researching different characteristics that would need to be in place for a community to utilize their trails for economic vibrancy. So I'm going to go over these ones that are highlighted, kind of highlighted on my screen. Maybe you can see that, but the first 6 or so are really critical. And we work with communities to assess these components in their own town. And I'll talk about how we've done that in Bristol and how we're doing that in Ossipee, New Hampshire. But really, we don't even necessarily need to get out onto the trail itself. Hopefully we know that it's there and it's in good shape, but we kind of start at the trailhead, which is, where the trail begins. Is it well marked? Is there a map? Are there kiosks? Parking is key. Restrooms become very big in nature-based economic development. If you are out in the outdoors and then you don't have somewhere for a public restroom, people aren't going to be able to stick around in your community to spend money. Then this pathway idea, some logical way to get from the trailhead to your downtown, to your village center, to your business district is really important. And initially we did think that it had to be walkable. We did end up visiting Kentucky trail towns as part of this grant research, and we found that people were willing to drive from that trailhead to the downtown if it was clearly marked and if they knew how to get there and knew that there would be something worth driving to when they got there. Then likewise, a downtown entrance, so it's just something that denotes, being able to understand if you're entering the town or the business district. And then in a lot of this work on the economic impact of natural assets in tourism and visitor economy, overnight accommodations are a pretty big deal. If there is nowhere for someone to stay overnight, there is kind of a decrease in spending opportunities, obviously, but we see our largest impact from those overnight stays. And it doesn't necessarily have to be your traditional motel or hotel, but it can be campgrounds, Airbnb, hostel, a lot of different options. And like I said, I already talked about the public restrooms being key. And then these businesses that are relevant to trail users. So those can include casual restaurants, coffee shops, drugstores, bike shops if your trail is, geared towards cyclists, grocery store, local shops. Those sorts of things are really of what, we've seen trail users being interested in. And then the rest of the characteristics I'm not going to go through, but these are all from other research on vibrant communities and in general, what you should be looking for to make your space welcoming to both residents and visitors. All right, so in another tenet that we have in this nature economy work that I do is that natural capital and its benefits should be available to all. And that is something that, I think we have an abundance of in New Hampshire. And I'll talk a little bit more later about some efforts to even increase that participation. But we know we have some trail infrastructure in New Hampshire, different types of infrastructure, rail trail corridor, snowmobile trails, hiking trails. And another common thing that comes up when we speak with communities is when we say trails, some folks may start thinking, oh, those 4,000 footers in the White Mountains, I can't hike those. And, my town doesn't have one of those. But really what we're talking about in most cases are more like in-town trails or trails that go through towns or near towns, rail trails, even walking tours, river walks, community trails, historic pathways. Those all have a large possibility or great potential for connecting with enhancing that economic activity in the main street. It's something to keep people in your community or to add to, they go out to lunch and then they can hop on a portion of the rail trail, or they, are going to meet up for dinner, but do a walk on a river walk first. So that's a nice thing to think about when looking at that economic vibrancy. It doesn't have to be, a very serious hiking trail, although those have benefits for the economy as well. And so one example of these kind of in-town trails I like to use is in Laconia. You're kind of over here in downtown Laconia, in a very easy 5-minute walk from the UNH cooperative, the Belknap County Cooperative Extension Office. You can be on the WOW Trail, and then you can be at this beautiful public beach that does have a restroom and has picnic tables, in another 5 minutes. So that kind of proximity to downtown is really appealing and, a component of this discussion. So taking all of that research and that experience we had visiting trail towns, we decided to build our own program that had components of the trail town programs that we had learned about, but also, had more of a New Hampshire flavor. And so we call it Downtowns and Trails, partly because the trail town program is registered and trademarked. So we have our own version of that. But also we wanted to put downtowns first, and that can mean village center, business district, Main Street, because it is an economic development program, and the downtown piece is what we're really trying to get to. Like I said, I have many great colleagues in natural resources who can work on trails, tell us the best stewardship, get volunteers to work on them. That isn't the main focus of our program, although it is a nice complementary piece as you keep those trails up and running. So I wanted to tell you about how we implemented that program in Bristol, New Hampshire. So it's a 5-step process where we work with a committee of volunteers, and we also worked with the town administrator. And the committee, it was born out of the town's economic development committee, had some representation from the library, from the regional watershed group in the area, business owners, and other interested citizens who were volunteering their time. And so we kind of go over some of that background that I gave you. Then we begin an assessment process. So we have 3 different assessments we do. We start looking at the downtown area, that linkage area, and then the trailhead using a mobile app, Esri collector for ArcGIS. And we take a map of the town, put it on ArcGIS, then it's available on people's phones. And we train them how to go out and do this assessment. So we're not doing an inventory. They're not saying, okay, this is every single business, every single crosswalk, but they are doing kind of what rises to the top when they're out and about exploring their town. And they'll make note of a business that they might think is of interest or appropriate for a trail user, or some signage, or any of those characteristics that I had up before. points of interest, are there overnight accommodations, all those good things. And they'll take pictures of them, and then they'll make some comments about them, and also indicate whether they think they're an asset or an opportunity. So asset is, something positive and that the town can look at, and an opportunity is a chance to build on something or make an improvement. So we do that spatial assessment first. And again, these volunteers, they're trained to go out and do it in their community. So there's a lot of really great learning and engagement, and kind of building that knowledge on the ground in the community. Then we train volunteers to complete interviews with businesses and residents and community leaders on, these are kind of what we call key informant interviews, just about this whole idea of connecting their town better with their trail. These can be kind of a chamber of commerce. They can be, a local representative, the town, staff. And then the third assessment is something that was not in any of the programs that we looked at, but that I thought was really important, was to develop this and to administer and work with volunteers they do the administering of an intercept survey for those using trails to determine their interests and how they're using the downtown. And also we try to get a spending profile to see what places they've been spending the money on when they come to visit, and in what categories those fall. So that all goes on over the span of about 6 months. And we then help the community kind of analyze that data for them, and put it together in, an accessible report, and really get to the next step, which isn't the final step, but we get to the point where we have a larger community gathering, and discuss some action steps. So, we engage the community through either the forum, but then we can also do other things like social media, discussions, posters, and just bringing together those different parts of the town. So just wanted to show you a few pictures from Bristol. This was their village center that had gone through a lot of updates over the past decade or so, and putting a lot of their infrastructure underground. Really cute center, but the town had decided they wanted to focus on their bike path, which was this portion about 2 miles from the village center to Newfound Lake, to the foot of the lake. And as you can see, it was in a little bit of rough shape. Also, many people didn't even know it was a bike path. They just thought it was the road. But they had over the years built some infrastructure that once you kind of get out of that village center town and start towards the lake, that is really helpful for bringing you kind of off the busy road and onto a nice bridge. Then you're back on the road. But again, some characteristics that our volunteers noticed, were some of these green landscaping opportunities or assets that the town really has. There is a downtown decorating committee that does a lot of the gardening work, but also really brings people together for events like, what have they done? They've done, Old Home Day. They've done like a flash mob around Halloween. They do stuff over the 4th of July. So really a neat kind of group that's been working on both the physical landscaping, but also bringing people together. Really key, I think, in Bristol, as we see in a lot of communities, right, is the library. So this is the back of the library in Bristol, really neat place, fairly new, right on that path out of downtown towards the foot of the lake. And it is a key space because it has a public restroom. It has a place to find out information about the community. The librarian is very engaged in the community, as are lots of our librarians. And she's often fielding questions from visitors about what to do, where to go, what to see next, what stores are open. So she plays a key role in that, and the library as a space does as well. And then just to show you a little snippet of some of the survey results. So like I said, we've trained volunteers in the town to go out and ask their neighbors, their visitors at 3 locations. They did it in the downtown, then halfway at the halfway point on the bike path, part of the bike path where they have a farmer's market, and then at the foot of the lake at the public beach. And so in total, we had, over 100 surveys completed, which is actually really good for this size of community and for the amount of time that they spent on it. And just interesting to see, we had our year-round residents and our seasonal residents, like a lot of New Hampshire communities. We have those 2 categories, and we thought it was important to kind of separate them out so we could, see different behaviors and trends. And just interesting to see who's been on the bike path. Our year-round residents were pretty familiar, but the seasonal ones were less so, as were the visitors. And then this is just a little snippet of the spending profile that we get. Now, not everyone fills this out. We only ask the visitors because we're really looking at what's that net new spending that would come into the community. And mostly don't focus too much on the total numbers, but really what it's helpful to see is the categories of spending where people are spending. They're buying food, which there are several restaurants in that area. There's also a gas station. There's not as many overnight accommodations. There is an inn, and then there are rentals out at the lake. So, but interesting to see that, when folks are visiting from New Hampshire, our sample, they weren't staying overnight, which makes sense. There's a lot of day travel, gifts, etc. Another interesting piece of asking visitors about where they're from is that Bristol learned that it had, international visitors that they didn't even realize. I guess, if you don't ask, sometimes you don't know. So this is something we find a lot of our smaller communities especially aren't quite sure about their visitor demographic. So that gives them some insight. And here are just a few things that, let me check how I'm doing on time, came up for opportunities to work on. Obviously, I'd pointed out that the bike path was a little bit tricky for folks and needed some upgrades, which I think, the town was working with the state over the 10-year plan. But then some signage. You were in the historic district in Bristol, and it had this tiny little sign and, a little tricky to see. This was the trailhead marker. There were some improvements that could be made. And just quickly, some actions that have been underway. That former trailhead that you see right here is now this really neat kiosk that is in partnership with the Newfound Lake watershed that talks about both the town and the watershed group. There has been a wayfinding and signage plan come to fruition in Bristol. I'm not taking 100% credit for this stuff, but some of the things were in the works, but they have said that a lot has been galvanized because of taking part in the program. And additionally, another connection to a trail on the other side of town has been made, towards if folks are familiar with that area, towards the Army Corps land by the Pemigewasset. There was another trail that they started working on because the town started getting excited about the downtowns and trails opportunities. So that is some insight and some things that we've been doing in Bristol. Just really quickly, we're in the process of working on downtowns and trails in Ossipee, and they don't have an actual trail. They have a former rail bed that goes through some of the village centers in Ossipee. And so we've been going through the same process. It's been a little bit delayed because of COVID. As you can imagine, some of these aspects, especially the intercept surveys, are tricky to do in this time period. And we're also in a very weird economic time. But we have in Ossipee some assets in that region as well, some businesses. This is a tailor shop that has moved from Route 16 into the downtown or the village center. Some folks might be familiar with Sap House Meadery, another business that is in Center Ossipee. But just briefly too, I wanted to say, the impacts of COVID have been, I think, of interest too for folks who think about trails and connecting with that for economic vibrancy. Obviously we have seen an increase in the use of trails. We don't have, as we don't have a ton of actual data about that, but we're hearing a lot of anecdotes about trails being busy. But then likewise, we have businesses, who are operating under different circumstances because of the pandemic. And one resource we do work with, I just wanted to throw out there to folks too, is called Trail Finder. And we just this year have added a trailside services component of this website where you can look and see what is around your trail. Should you want to go out for ice cream afterwards or get a meal or do takeout. So that's a neat opportunity. And right now it is free for businesses to add onto this resource. So I just wanted to add that so folks could think about it as well. But really it speaks to that marketing and promotion and kind of getting the information out there about what your community has. And finally, just really quickly circling back to that inclusivity, there are some initiatives that I think all communities should do well to think about, including access to nature and natural capital as part of their goals. And thinking about over the summer, we had a really great keynote from Julian Eigenman, who's a professor at Tufts, and talking about this idea of just sustainabilities and really, incorporating social justice and sustainability and economics all together. So just some things I think communities should be keeping in mind. But I'm going to stop there. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to open up the discussion.
Folks have questions. Are you familiar with the hand raising function? Under reactions down at the bottom? Or just raise a hand and I'll probably be able to spot you and I can unmute you or unmute yourself.
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay. Catherine.
Yeah, hi Shannon, thanks for the presentation. I want to ask you, there seem to be a lot of moving parts in the process. Where do you see the greatest friction happening in this process? And what can we do to help as community members?
That's a great question. Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts and it's a very interdisciplinary process, right? Yeah, I mean, so far in our communities that we've worked in, it's, we only had the program going for about 1.5 years, but I mean, I think it can be maybe in that initial piece of forming the committee and wanting to make sure you have a diverse representation, but then also towards the end where we're getting into action groups, really helping communities we've tried to help prioritize, these shorter term actions, kind of low hanging fruit. What can we get going that is kind of, like that trailhead marker was a bit of a low hanging fruit. And there was a signage plan, already kind of, they were hoping to work on. So that was too, but kind of fixing the actual road is a long-term process. So connecting the communities also with funding to do some of these improvements and upgrades is a component that can be a sticking place as well, I think. It's a great question.
Nancy Stiles, I see you have a hand up.
I do. Can you share with us how long it takes to get businesses involved in offering services and so forth? Or is that up to the Trails Committee, or is that up to the Chamber of Commerce, or who is the one that really drives the train on that?
Yeah, that's another great question. So just to clarify, you wanted to know how long it takes to get the businesses on board with offering more services to trail users?
Yes.
Okay. Yep.
I mute myself again.
Nope, I hear you. Yeah, I don't know if I have a good question for that. So in Bristol, we did already see, at the beginning, we did have that fairly diverse committee that had business interests, business owners on it. But there was an action committee that came out of the project as well that still kind of were chugging along with that. And folks had wanted to have more of a training on how to be a good ambassador for their community, how to welcome people. And I think offering those services is a bit more of, what that group would entail. We had one of the police officers at our community forum, and he said that he's often asked, where should I go to eat? And when people are visiting the town. So I don't know how long it would take. It definitely depends on the community's readiness and also their kind of how they perceive themselves to begin with. I think that Bristol does see itself as, having a visitor economy to some degree, especially with the Newfound Lake. So wanting to accommodate those, but, feedback that we get in the surveys and in those key informant interviews can be really helpful, especially about like hours that places are open, or in that assessment, people might say, well, there's no bike shop, or there's no, the coffee shop isn't open when I would be coming through on the path. So yeah, I think it's a really iterative process. I'm sorry, I'm not completely answering the question though.
Who do you think can be the driver of that?
Yeah, in Bristol, it kind of does go to that social component or that matrix that I put up. We see a really strong participation of town staff. So the town administrator as well as the librarian have been really key players, but also in collaboration with business owners. And in some cases too, the chamber can be, but really, I think the economic development committees that we have in communities are well suited to be a driver of that.
We've certainly heard interest from the chambers along the route, Hampton area and Greater Portsmouth. And I think other communities also have their individual economic development groups. I mean, one thing we've thought about is that, this group can also play a role in, getting those groups more involved, but also potentially generating volunteers to go out and do some of that sort of assessment work and communicating with businesses. I know Jeff Latimer from Gus's Bike Shop in Northampton had put some time into just identifying all of the businesses that are within a quarter mile of the rail trail as a starting point for a contact and outreach list.
That's a great point, Scott. Yeah, and so your group is a much larger group. So, I'm giving examples of Bristol, which is a little over 4,000 people, and Ossipee, which their population varies depending on season too, but maybe around 2,000, I think, of year-round residents. So small towns. And I think in the Seacoast, definitely the chambers and these other groups that are fairly well established. And you would have what makes a lot of sense is a regional, perspective on this, on your work. Yep.
Others questions? Juliet?
So just a question, have you seen a lot of new businesses start up along these trail communities, or is it more just existing businesses figuring out how to make use of the trail opportunities, or is it sort of a combination of both? Because one possibility that different communities in our region may want to be thinking about is, are there areas that need different zoning or something, or are we really focusing just on existing business support, or do we want to think about fostering a new type of tourism, maybe a small micro group of businesses that are trail oriented?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in the research that we did, especially in Pennsylvania on their program, they actually actively encourage new entrepreneurs to open up businesses along the former rail corridor. So Pennsylvania is kind of unique in that it has like, hundreds of miles of rail trail all connected. You can kind of go town to town, you can stay overnight, you can bike pack or whatever. But their program is run out of the Progress Fund, which gives money to businesses to start something in either a trail related business or a business actually on the trail. So I do think that is a component that would be really interesting. We haven't, as of yet, we haven't been doing it quite as long, but we haven't seen any new businesses start. Although the tailor shop in Ossipee, they moved from Route 16 recently into the village center because not just of this idea of hopefully having an actual trail on the former rail bed, but because the center is trying to revitalize. And we did hear in Bristol that there were ideas kind of coming out of the discussion, for coordinating some of the businesses more, maybe connecting some of the overnight accommodations that are a little further out with more of, that visitor economy that's coming to Bristol. And there was even an idea of having, more rentals for different, like a rental business for the water sports. So yeah, I think it's a combination, but you're right to be thinking about that, because I think at the onset, it really is those existing businesses that you already have that are going to be instrumental in helping you think about it. But I think, longer term, welcoming new businesses. And when you do that assessment too, you can say, oh, well, we didn't know we're missing this type of business, or we have a lot of a certain type of business. So it helps you assess the gaps.
As an example of that, Juliet, there's a cafe that opened up in Derry right along the rail trail called the Grind Rail Trail Cafe, but they had their original outlet in Derry, and I believe they just opened a second one in Wyndham at this point. So
yeah, that's a great point, Scott.
Example.
Yeah, they said they started because the owner was riding on the rail trail and wanted a place to get coffee, and there wasn't one. So
Mike Edgar, I see a hand up. Let's see if we can get you unmuted. There we go.
Yeah, I'm all set now. Yeah, listening to all this, and I'm trying to think of how you would actually functionally set up a coordination group to handle the various aspects of this. Because right now we've been talking about the economic impact and how to, maximize it, develop that. But we also have the maintenance aspect of it, because some towns are concerned about the money it would cost to maintain them, and then looking at it going, from Seabrook up to Portsmouth, would it be a joint committee, or would it be official town committees that would be appointed, and approved by the town so that they're more inclusive to all the various stakeholders? So I'm just wondering how, in general, this is handled when you're talking about something the size of ours going through several towns, and the various aspects of it. How is it normally handled?
Yeah, that's another good question. Yeah, so like I said, we've just, worked with one town at a time at this point, but especially in Kentucky, we witnessed, well, they have a slightly different approach to tourism. They have these regional tourism councils, and they had a very diverse committee for their whole county when we visited with them in Moorhead, Kentucky. But they had representation, from business, from the local hospital, actually, for the health impacts and benefits, the local university, then just various volunteers. They had a really diverse and fairly regional group, and that does seem kind of more of a natural fit. In terms of the maintenance, that's a really good point that I know less about. I mean, we see lots of partnerships. It depends on the type of trail, but we see lots of partnerships with, stewardship groups and land trusts on different trails. But in Bristol's case, it was the bike path on the state highway. So there was, partnership with the state and thinking about, plans for improving that over the long run. So it's a good question. Maybe Scott, you have some ideas about that too.
I do have some ideas. Actually, Jerry Klima, would you be willing to give a thumbnail of how the Coastal Trails Coalition has worked with Newburyport and Salisbury and Newbury and Amesbury on this, on maintenance coordination?
Sorry, I didn't.
Whoop.
Otherwise engaged. Can you repeat your question, Scott?
Yeah, sure. Mike Edgar asked a question about, we want to coordinate on the economics of this, but also coordinating on maintenance and, how can the communities work together in that regard? And I know we have a great example of how that has worked in terms of 4 municipalities working with the regional nonprofit group just south of the border. And could you give just sort of a quick thumbnail of how that's worked from a maintenance standpoint?
Yes. Yeah, with respect to trail maintenance, one of the issues that we had early on when we put in the first trail was that the police had a problem because people who had trouble on the trail, someone fell down, someone had an attack. I didn't know where they were. And so the response to that was the idea that we should put up a mile marker and every 1/10 of a mile along the trail, just so people would know the name of the trail, because we have 2 trails in Salisbury, and where they were. At least that would help. And then the next thought from that was, well, gee, if we're going to put up that, we should do an Adopt a Trail program where sponsors could put their names, their business names and contact information on a little sign with the name of the trail, etc. And so over the last 10 years, we've had an Adopt a Trail program in Salisbury and in Amesbury that's been administered by Coastal Trails. And in Newburyport, they did the same thing, but it's administered by their Parks and Rec department. And people, businesses get their names on a sign, and they pay $250 a year for certain trails and $150 a year for other trails. And the money comes in to Coastal Trails. And then, for trail maintenance, Coastal Trails spends the money. For example, we have contract with people to cut down problem trees or do pruning of trees. We have people who do cutting of brush. Brush is a real problem. It grows really fast. And so we hire people to do brush cutting. We've had volunteers. We've always mowed our trails in Salisbury with volunteers. People have their own mowers and they come and cut the grass. And it really is maintained quite well. And it's been, it's a mix of different people, different times. Some people do trimming, some people do other things, but you need regular trail maintenance. And I think that now we have it's an opportunity, but also a problem. We're just about to add another 2.3 miles of trail to go from our existing marsh trail, which is only 1.5 miles, all the way up to New Hampshire. And my personal feeling about that is that that's kind of beyond the scope of volunteers. So I think we're going to have to start hiring people. But, one of the goals, Salisbury is not a rich town. And one of the goals in getting this trail system developed was to have minimal town expense. And so, what our plan is to try to expand this Adopt a Trail program. Right now, we're bringing in about $5,000 a year. And this would probably expand the amount to another $5,000 at least. And then be able to hire contractors to do the mowing and take over some of the work. So it's worked really well. We actually have a big kitty built up over the years. With 10 years at about 5,000 a year, we're probably only spending a couple thousand. So it's worked out quite well. And the DPW is very happy. We have a cooperative arrangement with them. Sometimes, for example, the other day I saw there were potholes that were full of water in one of the parking lots. And Coastal Trails will pay for the gravel, and the town will go pick it up in a truck and spread it. So, there's really a very cooperative relationship between the trail group and the town. And it helped that I was a selectman and I'm the town moderator. So, but it's personal. Relationships help. But so we're going to have it. When this new trail that connects up to Seabrook is done, we're going to have well more than 5 miles of trails to take care of, and it's a significant amount. So, is that helpful?
Yeah, definitely. Another figure that I had passed on to the group in the past from talking with the town of Wyndham, they had estimated that their cost for maintaining their it's between 4 and 4.5 miles. The cost to the town, they had estimated at only about $800 a year, but
it's not very expensive. Right.
250 person hours of volunteer time.
Yeah. Volunteers can, and people wind up loving these trails. They really, really, really invest in them. I know everybody in town, but they just want to do it. Another thing that we've done, which has been, very nice, is that we have an adopt a bench program as well. And what happens is that if people want to place we have substantial granite benches that are just solid pieces of granite that are I think 4 feet long, 2 feet high enough to sit on, basically a place to sit. And people can inscribe them if they adopt the bench. And I think what we're asking now is $1,750 for each bench. And the cost of installing a bench is around $800. So for that, people can, do a memorial, do a family bench that they just have all their names on, do whatever, do something that's tasteful. We control that. But as a result, we have benches all along the trail that have been paid for by contributors. And they're nice benches. They'll last forever. It's a solid piece of granite. So, there are ways to make these are ways to bring in money or add amenities without really costing the town anything.
To your point about multi-town coordination, Mike, we're in the process of establishing a regional nonprofit that can play a role for recruiting and training volunteers to do that sort of work, also marketing the trail, also funding development. What we're anticipating is that we would maintain this separate regional group that serves as an advisory committee to the Planning Commission that could be kind of a coordination point for town appointed representatives to talk about, the issues that affect the municipalities themselves with maintenance or other topics.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. We have just 4 towns involved in our, coastal trails, and the relationships between a couple of the towns are terrific. Everybody knows what's going on, and a couple of others are not very engaged. So I would think that if you had a more formal arrangements, that would be good.
Other questions at this point for Shannon?
Yeah, I have a question about the volunteers. Who are these volunteers? Who's giving away their time for free, and who has time to do that to benefit businesses that make money and town?
Typically they're, well, Salisbury is a, very, middle-class, hands-on town, right? People have mowers. I mean, for 6 years, the retired fire chief said, "I'll mow the trail, and I don't want anybody else to do it." He literally, he kept the trail all by himself for 6 years, just because he loved it and his wife loved it too. And since then, there's several neighbors who have mowers, and they just talk among themselves and they take care of it.
These are retired people who are
yeah, mixed, but mostly retired, and people who are close by and who have who have an interest in it. I mean, I do some of it myself, but I'm not doing most of it. I'm doing some, but I'm just talking to people, and if, for example, I had a fellow who is on Plum Island, which is far away from Salisbury, who just said, "Gee, I don't have any grass to mow. I want to be active." So he comes over, he grabs a weed whacker, and he does all the weed whacking during the summertime, just because he likes it. So, and it's personal relationships, I guess you'd say, but there's a lot of energy that people love these places, and they will put time into them.
They put time, but there's only 20 of us here. So this is where people need to be, not with a weed whacker on the actual trail. That's my point. We need more in this part of the process.
So you need more people on, well, there's lots of different roles.
Yeah, there is.
We have actually, let me call on Cindy and then Larry Day, who had their hands up. And then we'll come back to you, Derek.
I was just going to add to what Catherine asked. I mean, I work for a large global company that does giving back activities at least 3 or 4 times a year. But until COVID came, we haven't done one yet. But it's pretty simple to get large groups of volunteers to come in for one day and do the work that people would do in a week or 2 weeks. It's pretty common. And we have a lot of large corporations here that we could definitely tap into. But I also hear what you're saying about the people we need here to get this moving forward. So just wanted to offer that.
So you're
saying
who does it. A corporation are forced to do free labor. Is that what
we're not forced to do free labor. It's called giving back to your community. Okay. We actually like doing it.
Well, yeah, for example,
quite a few of the larger companies in the community hold days like that.
Well, Timberland did a tremendous amount of work in Salisbury.
Exactly.
We built 1.7 mile trail almost strictly with the help of Timberland. Every year we would have a trail building day, the DPW, volunteers from here, volunteers from there, and we built a 1.7 mile trail for about $100,000. So, that's very real. Timberland they made a huge contribution in Salisbury.
Larry Day?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Can you guys?
I see other
people
nodding
hear me
their
okay?
heads.
Yep, good, Awesome. So I'd like to address a few things here. First and foremost, I'd like to apologize for my camera. This is the result of using your mountain bike and your road bike and not strapping down your camera and running over it 4 times. So I've lost my selfie camera. And hopefully there's business owners still on this call. I'm a resident of Greenland. I'm passionate about biking. I'm a local businessman. The nice lady there asking about who's volunteering, people like me. I'd like for Scott to do a little survey, and everyone can chime in by just doing the thumbs up to Scott. How many of you have been on any part of the rail trail from Portsmouth down to Seabrook in the last month on a bike or walking? So that's going to be the survey. And after I finish talking, Scott can come up with how many thumbs up he gets. So my wife and I, we're in Greenland. We're probably a mile and a quarter from the Ocean Road trailhead to get onto the trail. And those people that are interested about businesses. So we ride down to Hampton, and on the way down, we're like, okay, I wonder if the airport cafe right there at Hampton, I wonder if that's going to be too packed. Sure enough, we come up, jam packed. We keep going. Bogies is next. You know, Bogies is right on the trail. I know the owner keeps asking me, hey, what's going on? When are you guys going to develop this? He just bought out somebody. He's in there because he wants to be involved in this. So yeah, I'm a volunteer. I'm passionate about this. I'm connected in another way to this, but yeah, it's an awesome thing we have going, and getting people involved, getting the communities involved. So how many thumbs up we got, Scott?
I think I counted about 8, 9.
All right.
So of this
How
group,
many
I would guess if we
participants?
said not just in the last couple of months, but over the last year, it would be quite a bit higher. I think most folks have been out.
Good. Sorry. It's like today was a foggy day, right? So you can see Larry in the fog. All right, I'm going to mute out.
But to your point, Catherine, in terms of needing people at various stages of the process, earlier in this process, we had established committees in each of the towns of local residents to talk to their select boards or to their city council in Portsmouth's case, and just make sure that policymakers understood the local residents' interest and encourage them to collaborate with the DOT on making this happen. And there's more of that work to do as well. But in this context, we were just talking about the eventual maintenance. So we're at 7:40 here, and we have both Mike Dugas from DOT to give us an update on the Hampton to Portsmouth project, and Mark Dabowski from GPI to give us an update on the state rail trail plan. So if folks are okay with moving on, let me really thank Shannon for giving us her time this evening. And I think we'll probably have some further follow-up questions that we'll be in touch with you on as we think about how to take some of those steps that Bristol has taken in our communities here. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.
Mike Dugas, can we ask you to give us an update on where things stand with the Hampton Portsmouth project at this point?
Yes, certainly. And I was just typing you a chat message that I had to run to get my children, but I have enough time to finish what I'm doing, then I'll have to depart. So yes, the engineering task of the project has gone quite a bit slower than we had anticipated and hoped. And I'll give a little bit of detail about why that is. So when we're contracting engineering, we have essentially two paths we can take. We can take the easy, if you want to call it that, the easy path intended for smaller engineering contracts, which can normally be done in a couple of months as far as the contracting, or we can go the conventional route, which is intended for bigger projects, and that can take 12 to 18 months, sometimes longer. It's a very long process. So at the outset, the DOT chose based on our educated guess on what the engineering might cost. We chose the simpler process for contracting. And it's essentially choosing a contractor who is on retainer to the DOT, in this case, GPI. So as we got into the estimating for the work, we quickly came to the conclusion that the cost was much higher. The engineering cost much more than we had anticipated. And that pretty much threw a wrench into our plans for the contracting. So where we stand right now is the DOT is working to subdivide the engineering work into pieces so that we can still pursue the same contracting method. But that's proven to be a challenge. I plan to reach out to Mark Dabowski this week so that we can meet possibly as soon as next week and move this ahead a big step and get this engineering underway. I know Mark is anxious. He's ready to hit the road running. I can't report, maybe Mark, when he's speaking, we talk more about this, but there's been progress made on the environmental front over the summer and fall. But there's only so far the environmentalists can go until the engineering gets underway and starts feeding them information that they can evaluate. So as soon as GPI is under contract and they can proceed with their work, the first step is to work with the DOT to come up with a new revised schedule for the completion of the design and construction that's credible, that's achievable. So that's where we stand on the engineering front. And I'm willing to take any questions, but then, as I said, I will have to run to shuttle children around.
So at this point, what's sort of your best estimate of what this does to the eventual timeline?
Well, I hope to have the engineering under contract within the next month. So as I said, we will need to break the engineering into pieces. That's the direction that we're heading in right now. So the pieces will likely be one part of the work will be representing the preliminary design of the project. Another part will be the final design of the project. And then a separate element will be for the project management. And so once this is underway, Mark and GPI, they will be the day-to-day face of the project, handling the direct outreach to all the communities. So that takes a great load off the DOT for them doing that role, but we need to get that under contract. And so it won't be until we have GPI under contract that we can take a step back and have an honest look at where the construction schedule would fall. We still do intend to pursue the construction in a single contract. That was what we had agreed to some months ago. And we still think that that's the most reasonable way to pursue it. If we were to try to subdivide the contract in the construction to individual contracts, then that challenges the environmental process. And we're faced with trying to do the environmental permitting with pieces of the project instead of the whole, and that raises problems on its own. So we are still pursuing this as one project, and unless something else, other challenges are raised, that's the direction that we're heading in.
Jeff Latimer noted that he had seen a excavator on the trail just south of Breakfast Hill Road. And I was wondering, is that clearing out culverts so that there's a clear sense of how much of that standing water is due to clogged culverts versus due to subsidence, and so that can be accounted for in the engineering, or is that something else?
Actually,
that you know?
if I'm not mistaken, I believe that's work associated with the Coakley landfill. They're doing some mitigation work to relieve some of the flooding in that area, and also providing, I think it's groundwater monitoring or something to that effect, but it's related to the Coakley landfill. And so DES is involved with that work, and they've had to get permits from the DOT for access to that site.
Okay. Other questions for Mike in fairly short order so he can pick up kiddos? Mike Edgar?
Yeah, real quick. Mike, as far as actually getting the preliminary engineering through the executive council, when do you expect that?
So actually the benefit of the process that we're following for the contracting doesn't go through the executive council. In this case, GPI's contract has already gone through the council, and then we're able to issue task orders underneath that contract. And that's what makes the process so appealing while we're trying to still take advantage of that process.
Okay, so you're still talking about getting it through the task order in a month?
It goes that quickly once we are able to break the engineering at a pretty great cost into smaller manageable pieces that can individually be managed under this process. It does go that quickly, yes.
That's good. The other is, last I heard for completing construction, you're hoping in 22. Is that still a goal?
That's what we need to evaluate once we get Mark under contract. We need to take an honest look at how long the work should take. And to be honest, I am unfamiliar with trail construction. I've done 30 years of roads, and so I don't have an innate sense of how long this construction should take. And that's why we hire the experts. That's why we intend to hire GPI in this, because they do have that expertise.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Larry Day, you had a hand up?
Yes, Michael, thank you for what you're doing. Estimate on the costs, big number. Just throw it out there. I know you're not sure.
The construction cost?
Yeah.
The estimate that we're using right now, because we had to have a number in mind for the CMAQ funding, is, I believe it's just over $2 million.
Section from, yeah, how many miles?
It's about 9.5 miles, almost 10 miles.
Okay. And so that is from what section? So you're talking from just by Islington Road in Portsmouth through Breakfast Hill Road, or are you
goes
going
down from Barbary Lane in Portsmouth down to Drakeside, I believe.
In Hampton, right?
Drakeside.
So
Okay, thank
9.5
you.
miles roughly. Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
All right. Any others for Mike?
Mike,
All right.
Stephanie, I got a quick question. Anything I put it in the chat, but is there anything we can do to help move the project along?
For the engineering, I'd say no. I think this is solely between the DOT and GPI to work this out and to break the contract up into manageable pieces. That's really the critical step next.
And then any idea when the project will go to bid?
That's the critical step once GPI is under contract for us to set that schedule, right?
So I believe the last time we met with you, we thought the project would be under contract already. Is there something holding it up? Is just the
It's
cost?
everything that I explained, the difficulty of trying to fit a rather large engineering contract into a contracting method intended for smaller projects, and that's created a real challenge. Although I will say it is much faster even now than trying to change path and going to the more conventional contracting that, as I said, can take 12 to 18 months or longer sometimes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Julia?
Yeah, I just was going to say, I think this group would appreciate it. I'm sure you're willing to share the updated construction schedule once you get that figured out.
Absolutely. Once it's available, I'll be back to this Greenway committee to report. Right.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. All right. Well, thank you very much, Mike.
It's my pleasure.
Let's see. I think the hands that are up are residual from having already asked questions. All right. Well, thank you much. Can we go to Mark for a description of what the state rail trail is about, or state rail trail plan is about, and actually any other follow-up information on what Mike said that you could share? You know, your thoughts on once they finally get you under contract, what do you anticipate as time needed to do the work?
Yeah. Thanks, Scott. I'm glad to be here with you guys tonight. And we are, like Mike said, eager to get going. We've got a plan, and we want to aggressively hit the project hard and get it to construction as quickly as possible. You know, Mike's been great to work with. It's a bureaucratic system he's working in, and it can pose difficulties at times. But Mike's been a great guy to work with, so I appreciate him. You know, it is good that the environmental portion of the Seacoast Rail Trail has moved forward. That's under separate contract with McFarland Johnson. That's the company doing the environmental portion. We've been in coordination just to try to look for ways to streamline things and move it forward on the environmental side. But like Mike said, we're at a point now where unless we do any more engineering, they can't do more environmental work. I had originally proposed in the proposal to the DOT that we would have the project under advertisement 14 months after we got notice to proceed. So that would be putting, if that were still the case, and again, we need to talk about that with the DOT, but that would put advertisement at the end of next year for construction in 2022. We were, you know, there might be some efficiencies we can gain by the environmental having gone ahead a little bit, but we, and I know that Mike has asked, you know, to see where we can accelerate this schedule anywhere possible. So I think one of the main complication factors on that project is going to be some of the larger culverts, some of the hydraulic analysis, especially if there's tidal action involved, and just trying to make sure that if we do replace culverts, we're not causing problems upstream or downstream. And I think that's the big issue, really. That will take some design time. So that's what I know about the Seacoast Rail Trail now. Excited to do it. And like Mike said, I will be doing the project management portion. So that's something that the DOT hasn't done on a highway project, to my knowledge, before, but it will be, that's also to try to streamline the process, that I'll be the primary point of contact and moving things along. So looking forward to that. I know, you know, Tony Cholfi is going to be joining me with TEC there, and Tony and I are really excited to get going on this. And you know, once we're under contract, you'll have our full attention. So we're also
well, we appreciate you coming out before being under contract.
Sorry, Scott, what'd you say again?
I said we appreciate you coming out when you're not actually yet under contract.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. No, it's, you know, it's a personal interest of mine too, just like Tony's. You know, we are interested in rail trails in the state. So moving to the other project that I'm here to talk about tonight is the state rail trail plan. And we have been under contract with New Hampshire DOT since late January on that plan. And Dr. Shannon Rogers, who was on here earlier, is a part of the team. She's a great asset. She is tackling one portion of the plan. So the plan came about through a Senate bill through the New Hampshire legislature, which outlined the scope of the study. And it's a study of state-owned rail trails. So it's not a study of trails owned by other entities in the state. It's focused on state-owned rail trails. And there's like 12 different aspects to the plan. I can run through them pretty quickly. I'm happy to go into more detail with anybody that's interested. But two of the tasks involve creating a database and an online GIS map of the state-owned rail trails. So it's happy to share that screen later if you want, if anyone's interested, of the map and where that is. But we've got a map, who owns it, who maintains it, trail groups associated with it, when it was purchased, you know, a lot of as much information as we have on each rail trail. The second aspect of the plan is an economic impact analysis of the value of rail trails for the state. And this is where Dr. Rogers is coming in. So what the idea here is to survey users of the rail trails, of state-owned rail trails in the various seasons, whether winter, spring, fall, summer, and understand what are they actually spending when they come to visit the rail trails. And the purpose of that is to understand how do rail trails positively impact the economics of the state through tax revenue, really, is what we're focused on. And to make a case and to give information to the legislature for potential funding, for understanding how rail trails really benefit our New Hampshire economy. So there's a lot of effort going into that. We didn't have a lot of snow last winter, and then COVID hit. So we had we collected data, and it was not what we would consider normal data. We got great information, but we discussed with the DOT and the commissioner of DOT and agreed that we would extend the study another year to try to do surveying this winter the following spring and the following summer to try to get some more normal usage patterns. That one of the big issues is that a lot of the restaurants been closed or operating a limited capacity. Hotels were closed for a period or operating on a limited capacity. So we're trying to push this out and get some more normal data that can stand up to scrutiny, that say, hey, this wasn't taken during a strange time. We also are trying to create tools and documents that the state can use for maintaining trails, such as definitions of different maintenance items, costs of those maintenance items, best practices for insurance for state rail trail, for volunteer rail trail organizations. Also looking to develop a template agreement when a municipality makes an agreement with the DOT for the maintenance of a rail trail. There are several of those on the books right now, but as future municipalities do this, developing a template agreement that could serve as the basis of that. Developing a recommendation for what rail trail should receive funding in the future. It's like a tiered priority system. Like, here's the first tier, here's some trails that we really think should take the top priority of attention. Here's a second tier, here's a third tier. And a few other components to the trail study involve the integrity, the right-of-way integrity of the trails. There are a number of encroachments on rail trails, state-owned rail trails, where people have built onto the state-owned right-of-way, and trying to develop a plan for identifying what is the right-of-way on these rail trails and how can it be kind of policed is the way to think about it. Mechanisms for investigating, are there any encroachments? Developing some design standards for rail trails, just general standards for paved rail trails, stone dust rail trails, dirt rail trails. And there's a public engagement piece of this too, where we'll have be meeting with the public in different areas of the state. That's to be determined whether it's going to be virtual or whether it's actually going to be in person still, to gather input, to provide information on our findings, and then creating a pamphlet that can be available at state visitor centers for describing where the state-owned rail trails are and what's available in the state, and then a final report tying this all together. So there's quite a bit to do. We're partway into it. We're on a bit of a pause right now because the economic data drives a lot of the prioritization of the rail trails, and it's a centerpiece of the report. So we're waiting for this winter to start doing some economic surveying again. So that's it in a nutshell. Any questions? I'm sure there are. Scott, I think you're on mute.
Thanks. Julia.
Are you making, if I missed this, I'm sorry, are you making recommendations related to funding or looking at models from other states on how they fund rail trails?
Thank you. That was the one piece of the scope I missed. I appreciate you bringing that up. I was scrolling through my document over here and not looking closely enough. So one of the pieces of the plan is to figure out how can these trails be funded and what are other states doing. And Dartmouth is through their public policy center developing. I'm actually meeting with them on Monday. They're engaging some graduate students in looking at what other states are doing for funding mechanisms. So it's a pretty cool way. Dr. Rogers from UNH, this group from Dartmouth, getting a couple of New Hampshire universities involved, and just looking at best practices for funding, outside of traditional methods.
Great. Nancy?
Yes, Mark. Will you have prioritization according to seasons? Will it be seasonal prioritization, or how are you going to do the prioritization?
The idea is prioritization by trail or by segment of trail, to say we believe this this trail at this location should be done first, then this one. We'll look at a number of factors. We haven't determined what those factors will be, but different uses in different seasons, uses by different kinds of users is important. Connectivity to larger networks is important. Locations related to specific scenery or population centers are important. Those are some of the factors.
Thank you.
Yep.
Seth?
Hey, Mark, I had a quick question in regards to a previous meeting we had with you and going back to the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway, if that's all right.
Yeah.
You mentioned doing some public outreach.
Yes.
Is that still being planned? And if so, timeline? I'm getting some questions about that and just curious in terms of schedule for that.
Yeah, once we're under contract, the initial outreach would be to town public works, especially try to understand. Our first step is going to be try to understand what's out there and what needs attention. And then once we've made an assessment of existing conditions, then we'd be having outreach in each town. There's a few towns that have smaller pieces of the rail trail. We might combine those. We're not sure at this point, but public outreach opportunities, especially with the selectmen of each town, or providing other opportunity for people to comment on what the plan is. And we're really looking for input too on what people see, what people know, and ideas. I think one of the things that certainly has a lot of public interest that I've already heard about is, connection points to the trail. And, there was discussion in a past meeting about whether this project would include those. Right now it doesn't. It's just the trail itself, but we would like to coordinate with, whether it be a town or a business or some sort of entity that would work with us in developing these access points. So that's an important piece.
Along those lines, I'm sure you're going to have some coordination that's going to be required with towns in terms of infrastructure.
Yeah.
And some of those are going to probably cost some money. Any idea as to how to approach those given the forms of government you're going to be dealing with along the trail? I guess, is that going to become an obstacle is my question.
Is your question that maybe there's some elements that need, like drainage, things that need to be upgraded, and who's going to be responsible to pay for it?
Not who's responsible, but just how do we keep the project moving forward if we come across something that a town might be required to pony up some funds for, and given how they can allocate money. I know cities don't have those problems, but towns do.
Yeah, no, I understand. I don't have a good answer for that right now. It's what I do know is that the idea is anything that would impact the integrity of the rail trail, we would fix. I don't have the power to speak for the DOT about who's paying for what, but that's going to be something we're going to need to discuss.
Larry Day, your hand is up. Is that left over from your question to Mike Dugas, or did you have another question for Mark?
That's a leftover, sorry.
Okay, great. And same thing, Nancy?
I didn't know my hand was still up. I thought you took it. I thought you took it down when I asked the question.
Okay. Great. Let's see. Anybody else have questions for Mark? So it sounds like ideally next spring, if things move forward in the timeline that Mike was talking about, when we might be out talking to the communities.
That's right. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Early on, we're going to need to do quite a bit of ground reconnaissance and the right-of-way. Trying to understand the right-of-way of the corridor. The DOT would like a fully recorded right-of-way for the corridor. Once we have an idea of what the state owns, I think that's going to allow us to do a lot better coordination with those abutting.
So I know something that there's a, oh, go on.
I was going to say, a lot's going to depend on if we can get out there before there's too much snow. So we'll see.
All right. Well, thanks.
Thank you.
I wanted to just give a brief update on the Hampton Falls Marsh project. So at this point, we've just been talking about the Hampton to Portsmouth component. In the last cycle of the 10-year plan, the trail segment in Seabrook from the Mass State line up to the Hampton Falls town line was programmed in the 10-year plan to be built with federal funds in 2030. At the same time in Seabrook, there have also been commitments of money and materials from developers of projects along Route 1 that sound like they would be adequate to build a ghost trail style stone dust trail through Seabrook, largely with in-kind and volunteer work and at relatively low cost. And so there's a hope that while it's in the 10-year plan for 2030, that might be able to happen on a shorter timeline once the town can nail down their management agreement with DOT, much as Hampton and Northampton and Portsmouth and Rye, Greenland got their management agreements in place last year. That, though, also leaves as a gap the section of the trail through Hampton Falls up into the southern part of Hampton. The solicitation period for projects for the next round of the 10-year plan, DOT's 10-year transportation plan, happened this summer. RPC worked with the town of Hampton Falls to put together a proposal to do that section of trail, drawing on the design work that came out of that UNH engineering department study several years ago. Tony Cialfi updated the engineering cost estimates for us to have to go in with that application. So that went in early September. There's been a preliminary ranking process at Rockingham Planning Commission. Each of the regional planning commissions solicits projects from their communities. And then there's an initial review and evaluation process. DOT gives a sub-allocated budget to each region and asks each region to send them projects up to that budget plus two additional projects that DOT will review the cost estimates for. And then there'll be a final regional ranking late this winter. But in that preliminary regional ranking, the Hampton Marsh Rail Trail project actually came up as the top priority project in our region. And I'll note that I recused myself in that process. Usually for our staff initial evaluations, I tend to work with municipalities to help them develop their projects, and then our other staff do initial staff rankings. So I didn't have my thumb on the scale in that regional ranking. But so that's a good initial step. And we'll see how the cost estimates come back from DOT, the review of those cost estimates, and how the ultimate regional ranking comes out late this winter. But so far, so good. If we are successful in getting that project onto this next iteration of the 10-year plan, that would likely be programmed in 2032. So this is another case where we would have the iron in the fire, but the goal would be to conduct a capital campaign to see if we can generate a significant amount of private sector funding that we could then put forward to the state and say, if this project can be accelerated, there's this private sector funding that is available that could offset the state's cost in terms of using federal dollars. So, so that will be work for the coming year, designing that capital campaign, essentially identifying the amount of money that our target is for that segment of trail, but also for other elements like trailhead access, trailhead parking, trailhead facilities, some of the points that Shannon made earlier. In terms of work plan priorities, the other agenda item here for the coming year, that is certainly one of them, estimating what our needs are in terms of trailhead access and what the associated costs would be, what we need to raise to accelerate projects if we can get them on the 10-year plan. And that will also be a matter of working with the municipalities to identify where those trailheads are. Do we have anybody who can give an update on the Seabrook-Salisbury connector? Derek, you're on. Actually, you are here still. Could you just let us know where things stand with the connector and the progress on the Old Eastern Marsh?
Yes, so we have finished the connector except for a bridge where the Salisbury piece ties into the actual rail trail. There's a temporary bridge there. The stone dust connector is about 1,000 feet long. There is a trailhead with parking and signage. We are getting ready to put granite benches in there that are memorial benches. And there is a lot of use already, even though can't get very far south because of the construction at Route 1. It's still continuing with the bridge over Route 1. But the connector itself is, for all purposes, completed at this point, and has been giving great access onto the Salisbury Railroad. The East Coast Greenway folks have contacted us about making sure we have signage because they want to include that in their plan so that they can denote that as a section of the East Coast Greenway as well.
Great. That's another step for this group to work on in the coming year. Similarly, is developing a signage plan for the Hampton Portsmouth segment, and I think we'll be able to draw on some of the work that Christine Keeney has been doing. She is closing in on completing design guide for the entire East Coast Greenway that has some good guidance on signs, mileage marker signs, wayfinding signs to draw people off the trail into downtowns to access services and goods and so forth. Other questions at this point? Danya?
Yeah, no, Scott, can you hear me? Scott?
Yes, I can.
Scott, okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't, well, for some reason, I'm only audio for some reason. But, well, the only commentary not a question, but just a commentary, as you probably all know, the Seabrook station for the C&J buses has now apparently been completed. And that Seabrook bus station is going to add additional traffic coming in not only from Boston but also New York. So all of the marketing and the outreach, using that maybe bus station as a way also to attract a higher volume to some of the especially the Seabrook, Salisbury, and the trails in that area, and then up further along the coast.
That's a great point. That seems like an opportunity. Sort of identifying assets in each of the corridor communities and how those connect to the trail. So thanks for Thanks for pointing that out, Danya. So,
And-
so this group, oh, go on.
Oh, sorry. So just a quick one from Mark, because unfortunately I wasn't able to ask the question. I'm a recent member to RISE Budget Committee, and talking recently, I guess the question was about what is it that the towns are going to be expected to fund as it relates to the rail trails. Is there any way that we as a group could work around making sure that any information regarding funding needs can come through in a more organized way, especially since many of us work with either on budget committees or work with your town's respective budget committees, and that would help facilitate, I would believe, the information on funding requirements.
Yep. So when we start with the project, my intent is to keep a list of you that would get like weekly updates on what's going on with the project, and we'd have periodic meetings. Off the top of my head, I can't speak for the DOT here, but I don't think there's this expectation that, you know, DOT is paying for part of this trail and the towns are paying for part. This is a DOT project. I think the questions really is, are there certain complicated areas that there might be an issue that the town needs to address because it might be affecting the rail trail outside of the state right of way somewhere. So I don't know where those are at this point in time, if there are any, but you know, I imagine those would be specific and limited, but I do hope to have regular communication with a group that, you know, stays informed with what's going on.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments at this point?
Hey, Scott, it's
yeah, Scott Baker.
Scott, just a quick question for you. With respect to the existing trail and its status today, as you know, vegetation continues to grow year after year. And with the inherent delays that are going to take place with the building of the trail, the vegetation will essentially get to the point, whether it's next summer or the summer thereafter, where there'll be stretches of the trail that you just can't pass. It will be impassable. Is there anything that can be done at either the town level or the volunteer level or the state level where we can get out there and trim back some brush to make certain that people can still get through?
I know that question had come up for DOT at the meeting we had this time last year. And I think the initial word that came back from DOT is that if there was going to be any formal activity, formal sanctioned activity out on the corridor, they would want municipalities to take over management responsibility earlier than they have currently agreed to do under the maintenance agreement. You know, I know there is precedent in Seabrook where I think that DOT had just allowed either the town or the Friends group to sign some sort of a liability waiver and have volunteers go out and do brush clipping and trash cleanup that didn't trigger, you know, towns taking a full responsibility for maintenance and enforcement on the trail at this point. And so I think that may need to happen town by town. I think when those questions went into DOT, the brush cutting question was also combined with a interim use and questions about controlling people driving on the trail and a number of interim uses. And I think DOT was hesitant to have the idea out there that people could just start using the trail now, regardless of whether the improvements have been made. But the point's well taken that, you know, the more it gets overgrown, the it's more work to be done later, and there are probably some volunteers that would be willing to go out and do some work. So I think we can ask DOT for probably permits to be out there for a day here, a day there, to try to deal with some of that.
Great.
Any others? So we've gone a long time since the last meeting of this group, and I think that Shannon's presentation kind of makes clear that there's work that we can be doing now in parallel with the work that's happening at DOT and at GPI and at McFarland Johnson in terms of getting the Hampton Portsmouth section designed and permitted and built. So I'd like to have this group start meeting again on a more regular basis. I think everybody's pretty well accustomed to Zoom meetings at this point, so COVID shouldn't be a barrier to that. My intention would be to send out a scheduling poll to everybody who is on tonight and others who have participated in these meetings in the past, and see if we can have a next meeting. At this point, I would guess early December, and start looking at a work plan for the year. By then, we can probably come back with some initial thoughts on signage, and have something fleshed out for feedback on what we want to take on over the next 12 months, mobilizing the volunteers we have. Does that work? Okay. Any parting questions? I see some thumbs up icons. All right. Well, thank you all for your time tonight. I'll be in touch. I'll get meeting notes out to everybody and scheduling poll for our next meeting. And I look forward to talking with you soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Bye.
Thanks, Scott.